At 7:14 a.m., the world went silent. Not silent like nighttime, not silent like an empty room. Silent like something had been surgically removed from the air itself. I was standing in my kitchen, coffee halfway to my mouth, when I heard my neighbor's dog barking outside. And then, mid-bark, it just stopped making sound. Not stopped barking. Stopped making sound, its mouth kept moving, nothing came out. I put my coffee down, my phone buzzed. A text from my sister, BRT, talk to you. I frowned and typed back, what? She replied instantly, can't talk right. WRDS, wrong. That's when I noticed the television was still on in the living room, tuned to the morning news. The anchor was moving her mouth, urgent, panicked, gesturing at the camera, and what came out was noise. Not words. Fragments. Vowels stitched together wrong, consonants missing, like someone had taken the English language, put it in a blender, and poured it back out. I am the only person on earth who can still speak. My name is Kaito. This is the day language died. And somehow, I was the last one who remembered how to use it. Let me back up. I want to tell you what an ordinary Tuesday looked like, so you understand exactly how much was lost in a single instant. I lived in a small apartment on the 7th floor of a building that overlooked the train tracks. I worked as a translator, which, in hindsight, might be the single most ironic job for the last man on earth who can still talk. I translated manuals, contracts, the occasional novel. I loved words. I loved the shape of them, the weight of a sentence built well, the way a single comma could change everything a paragraph meant. That morning I'd been running late. I remember thinking, as I grabbed my bag, that I needed to email my client about a deadline extension. I remember thinking in words. Full sentences, formed and fluent in my head, the way they always had been. Then 7:14 a.m. happened, and the world around me stopped forming sentences at all. I stepped out into the hallway. Mrs. Adamola from 7B was standing in her doorway, phone pressed to her ear, trying to say something to whoever was on the other end. Her mouth worked hard, her eyes wide with something between confusion and rising terror. What came out was broken shards of sound. Ha. Who. Done. I don't. Why? She looked at me. I said without thinking, are you okay? She flinched like I'd struck her. She understood me. I could see it in her face. Comprehension flickered there, clear as day. She understood every word. She just couldn't answer me in kind. Whatever this was, it hadn't taken away understanding, only production. People could still hear language and process it. They simply could not create it anymore. Except me. I want you to picture 8 billion people trying to speak and failing. All at once. All over the world. In the same second. I went down to the street level because I needed to see it with my own eyes. Needed proof that this wasn't some isolated malfunction in my own head. The city was in chaos. Not the loud, riotous chaos you'd expect, but a chaos built entirely out of silence and static. Car horns blared because horns don't need words. Alarms screamed because alarms don't either. But every human voice on that street was reduced to fragments, false starts, the auditory equivalent of a book with half its pages torn out. A woman grabbed my arm at the crosswalk. She was crying, mouthing words desperately, her hands shaking as she pointed toward a stroller pinned beneath a fallen scaffolding pole. She couldn't ask for help. She couldn't scream for it. All she had left were sounds with the shape of a plea and none of the substance. I understood her instantly. I didn't need the words, but she needed mine. So I turned to the men nearby and said, someone's baby is trapped. We need 3 people, now. Lift on 3. They moved. They understood me. We got the baby out. Kneeling on broken concrete afterward, I understood something that terrified me more than the silence itself. I wasn't just the last man who could speak. I was about to become the only interface between 8 billion minds and the world they no longer had words to describe. By noon, I'd made it to the university where my old professor, Dr. Renner, ran a linguistics lab. I don't know why I went there instead of home. I think some part of me needed someone who studied language for a living to tell me this wasn't real, or to tell me what it meant if it was. She met me in the lobby, looking like she hadn't slept, though it had only been hours. On the whiteboard behind her, someone had scrawled equations, waveforms, half-finished diagrams of the human auditory cortex, the frantic work of scientists trying to understand a catastrophe with the one tool that had just been taken from them. She handed me a tablet. Every language on Earth, every dialect, every regional variation, gone in the same instant, adjusted per time zone, meaning this hadn't rippled across the globe with sunrise or nightfall. It had happened to everyone at once, regardless of where the sun was in their sky. That ruled out anything biological spreading like a virus. This wasn't contagion. This was activation. She tried to speak and managed only fragments before typing instead. A radio telescope array had picked up a signal at 6:58 a.m., 16 minutes before the world went silent. A waveform unlike anything I recognized from any of the 40-some languages I'd translated in my career. She typed, "I think it's a key. Something in that signal fits the human brain like a key fits a lock, and I think it turned something off." The signal didn't look aggressive. It looked precise, deliberate, the way a scalpel looks precise instead of a blunt weapon. Whoever sent it hadn't wanted to destroy humanity. They'd wanted to silence it. Cleanly. Except, apparently, for one exception they hadn't accounted for. Me. This is the part of the story where you'd expect me to say, I discovered some special genetic mutation, some secret bloodline that explained why the signal skipped over me. The truth is stranger and, honestly, sadder. Dr. Renner ran me through every scan her lab had. Nothing was different about my brain structurally. What we found, after hours of cross-referencing, was this. At 7:14 a.m., I had been the only human being on the entire planet who was not, in that instant, actively listening to another human voice, watching dialogue, or otherwise receiving structured language input. I'd been alone in my kitchen, no radio, no TV yet, no phone call. Just me, my coffee, and silence, 1/2 second before the signal hit. Everyone else on Earth had been mid-reception, a parent murmuring to a child, a radio host talking to no one, a phone call in progress. The signal had used that open channel to reach in and disable the production side of the circuit. I hadn't dodged it because I was special. I dodged it because, for one accidental 1/2 second, the door the signal needed to walk through simply wasn't open. It was the loneliest kind of miracle. My isolation had been my armor. By evening, word had spread, not through speech, but through typed messages, forwarded texts, panicked group chats, that there was one person in the city who could still talk, then one person in the country. By nightfall, there were people outside Dr. Renner's building. Not a mob, something quieter and more desperate. People holding up phones with messages typed in advance. Please, my mother is having a heart attack and the dispatcher doesn't understand my sounds. Please just speak for me. I spent the next 6 hours on the phone, passed from stranger to stranger, translating panic-typed messages into clear-spoken instructions for paramedics, for firefighters, for a woman in labor whose partner couldn't articulate the contractions' timing to the midwife. Every call ended the same way. Relief, and then a kind of grief, because the person realized they might never get to say thank you again. Only type it, only gesture it. Sitting on the university steps around 2 a.m., throat raw, I realized something that scared me more than the invasion itself. If I was the last voice on Earth, I wasn't just useful. I was a single point of failure for an entire species that had just remembered how much they needed to be heard. At 3:47 a.m., the array picked up something new. A second signal, weaker, shorter. And when Dr. Renner overlaid it against the first, the shape was almost identical, except inverted, like a photographic negative. She typed, "A key undoes a lock. This might be the other half of the key. If the first signal had silenced the world by exploiting an open channel, the second might only work the same way. It would need someone actively speaking, actively receiving, right as it arrived, to reverse what had been done. It would need the exact opposite of how I'd survived the first wave." She looked at me, and for the first time all day, I saw fear in her eyes that had nothing to do with the silence itself. She typed slowly, "It has to be you. You're the only one who can still talk. If you're speaking when it arrives, you might be the door it needs to get back in." The signal was due to sweep the globe again in 11 hours, this time as a wide broadcast, instead of a narrow burst. I had 11 hours to decide whether to spend the last day of being the only voice on Earth trying to give that voice back to everyone else, not knowing whether doing so would restore language to the world, or simply silence the last voice that had it. I spent those 11 hours talking to everyone who wanted to listen. Dr. Renner rigged a live broadcast through every emergency channel, every radio frequency, every social platform still limping along on autopilot. My voice, and only my voice, going out to a species that could no longer answer back except in typed fragments and desperate silence. I told them who I was. I told them what we'd found. I told them honestly that I didn't know if the second signal would restore anything, or take the last piece of language left in the world and snuff it out mid-sentence, mid-me. I told them I was going to try anyway. Not because I was brave. I want to be honest about that. I was tired and scared, and the weight of being the only person who could say, "I love you," and have it land as more than fragments had become unbearable within a single day. If there was a chance to give the words back to everyone else, even at the cost of my own voice, I was going to take it. At 2:58 p.m., 11 hours after the second signal was first detected, I stood on the steps of that university building, microphone in hand, camera rolling. I said the only thing I could think to say. My name is Kaito. I don't know if this will work, but if it does, the first thing I want you to say, when you get your voice back, is something to someone you love. Don't waste it on small talk. Don't waste it explaining what happened today. Just say the thing you'd regret not saying if this happens again. At 2:58 p.m. and 40 seconds, the second signal arrived. I felt it before I understood it. A pressure behind my teeth, like the moment before a sneeze, except it lived in my throat instead of my nose. My vision blurred. For one horrifying second, I thought this was it, the moment I lost the only thing that had made me useful in a broken world. Then, from the crowd gathered below the steps, thousands of them, phones raised, faces upturned, I heard it. A single word. Cracked, hoarse, disused for a full day, but real. A man near the front, gripping his phone in one hand and his daughter's hand in the other, looked down at her and said, "Clear as anything. Sweetheart." Just that, one word. But it was whole. The crowd went up like a wave. Not applause, words. Overlapping, chaotic, beautiful words. Thousands of people saying the first things that came to them, some crying, some laughing, some just repeating their own names over and over, like they were testing whether the miracle was real by hearing themselves exist in language again. My voice was still there too, by the way. Rougher, different somehow, but there. I wasn't silenced. Dr. Renner's best guess, scrawled later that night on the same whiteboard, was that whatever the second signal needed a door for, it had found 7 billion other doors the instant they opened, and never needed to close mine at all. 6 months later, people still recognize me on the street sometimes. They don't say much. What is there to say to the man who was, for one day, the last voice on a silent planet? Mostly they just nod, or place a hand briefly on my shoulder. Dr. Renner's team never identified where the signals came from, or why. The array still listens. So far, there's been nothing else. I went back to translating manuals and contracts. It feels different now. Every sentence I build on purpose, the way you'd rebuild a house on land that had once, briefly, been swallowed by the sea. I was the last voice on Earth for one day. I hope I never take being one of many again for granted.